Welcome everyone to my new series, English Character Sketches. So this is the beginning of a project that's been incubating in my mind for over 5 years now. The idea as it first crossed my mind was to create a series of stories on key historical figures from a particular nation or historical event, along with recordings of myself sketching them. I've tossed around this idea in my mind from time to time, but it never quite landed until recently it resurfaced once again while I was reading the excellent book, The English and Their History by Robert Toombs. And as I worked my way through this fascinating account of the development of England, it struck me that now is the time to make this idea a reality. And once I got serious about this idea, I couldn't stop going. The original idea was to do maybe about 50 characters with a short biographical description for each of them, but I didn't want it to be boring. I really wanted these characters to shine. I also wanted to keep their biographies fairly succinct, but without oversimplifying them. Some of these characters have gone down in history as heroes, others as villains, and many of them as both, depending on who you ask. In my historical sketches here, I'm simply aiming to consider these men and women as human beings and to understand just a little bit of what made them tick. Because history isn't as simple as it sometimes seems, and even the most infamous villains of history or the most incompetent leaders must have had at least some view of the world in which what they were doing made sense. And this is why history should not be boring. The story of kings and queens of England isn't simply a litany of names and Roman numerals for us to memorize, but a tale of intrigue, ideas, clashes, and alliances every bit as dramatic as Game of Thrones. And yet this is the story of real people. It's the story of ourselves today, even if we're not English. These people faced decisions and struggles not so fundamentally different from those we face every day, and that still reverberate in our politics no matter where in the world we live. And what better way to get to know these people than by spending a little time drawing each of them? Although I am aiming for an overall simplicity in this series and to avoid making it too tacky or melodramatic, I earnestly hope and believe that it should not be boring. I've gone beyond my initial ambition of just drawing the characters and releasing them as a simple series of vignettes. Instead, I've grouped these characters into different volumes with some of their contemporaries, which will highlight the connections and conflicts between these characters. You can think of each volume as a chapter in the broader story with its own title and its own area of focus, laid out largely in a natural chronological order. And while this series won't aim to explain or dissect every historical conflict or debate in the way that a traditional history course might, it's going to be character-driven all the way through. How else can we really learn about history but starting with the characters that actually lived it? Each volume will have its own historical themes to explore and dilemmas to consider as they presented themselves to the characters we're featuring. Some of these themes and dilemmas will cross over naturally between volumes, and others will apply mainly to a single volume. So this is an enormously exciting but also a daunting project for me because I'm not an artist by any formal training. I'm not a historian, and as I'm sure you've noticed by now, I am not an Englishman. So my sketches will be the humble work of an amateur, and my historical descriptions will lack the academic insights of a professor or even the familiarity of someone who grew up learning English history in school. I'll probably experiment with different styles from time to time, but the videos themselves aren't going to be flashy, just simple sketches of simple people as performed by a novice, spending about an hour drawing each sketch. But I'm accepting all of this as part of the project and not letting it stop me because you don't have to be a professional to learn about and learn from history. That's probably why you're here too, after all. We learn as we go, and I'll certainly make mistakes along the way, but I hope that through this project I can become at least a bit of an artist, a half-decent historian, and okay, I still won't be a proper Englishman, but I hope to at least absorb some of the best aspects of the English spirit through making these videos. Okay, one last note. If you happen to be watching this in the earliest days of the project, or if things don't go as smoothly as planned, you may notice that the first volume to come out is actually volume 2. Yes, there is a volume 1 in the works, and that one will feature a set of earlier characters, including some heroes and villains of legend. That volume will be called Founders and Fables. So yes, there's more on the way, but I decided that rather than wait until I've gotten a ton more drawings completed, I would release what I've done so far and add on to it incrementally. But for those of you who are curious, currently I have a series of 4 volumes planned, all of which are already in construction in various forms. Volume 1 is the furthest along. It's called Founders and Fables, and it will explore some of the earliest myths of the English people, as well as some of the founding fathers, so to speak, of the English nation. Volume 2 is already live and focuses on how years of Viking invasions wore down the English kingdom and eventually led to subsequent conquest by the Normans. Volume 3 will tackle the Norman conquest head-on and focus on its immediate effects on England, leading up to the rise of the Plantagenet kings. And finally, Volume 4 will take us firmly into the era of the early Plantagenet kings, with characters like Henry II, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and Thomas Becket starting the series out, and then moving on towards kings like Richard and King John, all the way up to the point of Magna Carta. Will there be more volumes after that? Time will tell, but I think this is already an ambitious chunk for getting started, so I'll reevaluate when I get there. Thanks for joining me on this historical and artistic project.